everybody, Jason Burmis here, and welcome to the Zombie Joe Show finale. We will get through it together. This town hall was almost unbearable to watch. That's why we did the watch along in several parts. I had seen many of the clips, some of which that we still haven't gotten to. None of the China stuff has been talked about, but to just give people a little bit of a recap of the Zombie Joe Show and what we actually have been watching here, I want to remind people that didn't see part one because I was banned from YouTube for a week. Got my first strike for a past video, the Alex Jones interview. And remember, the warning before that was daring to play the ivermectin clip on the Senate floor. Just saying it. I'm not saying what that clip is about because I don't want to get in trouble, but I dared to play it. And it's funny because, you know, although I got contacted by the Wall Street Journal this week, and I'm still very weary about them, I do want to say they did let, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal that let Ron Johnson do the op-ed piece about that very YouTube video. Okay? And we may have to do that live and bring that up because that's a good point. That the Wall Street Journal did at least let Ron Johnson do that piece about YouTube big tech censorship. So at least kudos to them. Anyway, that's where I've been. And if you want to see the Zombie Joe Show part 1 and 2 with this town hall watch along, which he started by telling people how much he loves little kids and how everybody knows he loves little kids. And part 2, okay, part 2, where he ends with what we began part 3 with, how his grandkids can use the online to make him look like he's from the 7th century. That from Pinocchio's nose to trying to say that, minorities might have trouble with the internet. I mean, there's, this thing's been really, really tough to watch, okay? And the constant promotion of the vaccine and that these people are independents and, old Joe's your grandpa, but he can barely speak. I mean, anybody who's seen any of these now knows that this is a tough one. The man can barely speak. So before we get into it, I want to tell everybody to thumbs this video up, subscribe, and share. Join the Burmis Brigade if you are new. But Rockfin, Rockfin, Rockfin. You saw that Rockfin behind me. That's where I really need you. That's where I really need you. The Go Get funding is here because they took away my GoFundMe this month or in January, so we will no longer be using them. That's a great way to support me. All the documentaries are free. Loose Change Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, and Shade the Motion Picture. Go check them out now. Rockfin, 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 Rockfin. Tomorrow, we will be doing our Rockfin exclusives. Okay, everything is free for the next week plus now. We've been doing it. All these you missed. You missed 13 plus videos, and that's, not even counting the ones before that I can no longer do on YouTube. Like this one right here. More Davos Daily Breakdowns. We're doing it big, guys. So you're missing a lot of videos, okay? I don't know if we, I think we did put that one on YouTube eventually. But we got a ton of great free stuff. I need you to go over there because if I get deplatformed, that's where I'm going to be. And I believe if you want to see the video that got me a strike, okay, both of them are up here. The Holiday Spectacular with John Fitch. This is it, the Mixed Martial Mindset Holiday Spectacular. That is there. And then it is my Great Resistance interview with Alex Jones of over an hour. Those are the two baddies for YouTube. They're bad. So without further ado, let's go back to Zombie Joe and get through this, guys. Let's get to the end of this town hall.
Obviously wrong. That everybody agrees on, the way they were raised. The way we were raised, as my mother would say, if half the things that occurred in the last campaign came out of my mouth, and she'd say as a kid, we'd wash my mouth out with soap. I mean, we have to be more decent and treat people with respect and just decency.
Let me ask.
I want to ask everybody something. That was a ramble on, out of context deal where he starts talking about, he was already in a ramble, and that's why we ended it, by the way. But when he's talking about decency, hey, Joe, is it decent to go in and destabilize Syria via Operation Timber Sycamore? How decent are those drones that are over in Nigeria and elsewhere via Africa, Somalia? Is that decent, Joe? Is what we've been doing in Afghanistan and Iraq decent, Joe? Stuff that you helped enable with the war on terror? How about that relationship with Pakistan, let alone China, Joe? Is that decent? Because you know me, I get off on tangents. I use bad language. I use rough words. I use stuff that maybe the mainstream doesn't use. That's not very decent of me, is it, Joe? But I'm not killing babies. I'm not behind propaganda. I'm not lying to not only the American public, which you're supposed to represent. You couldn't represent a ham sandwich. Okay? Forget about being indicted on a the ham sandwich. You can indict a ham sandwich. No, he couldn't represent one if he was told to. Not a hot ham and cheese for Joe. Because he doesn't know where he is half the time. I mean, you know how coached he was for this and how spectacularly he has failed? Decency. Give me a break.
About a question which does often divide many people in this country, immigration. Your administration, yes, along with congressional Democrats, expected to unveil an immigration reform bill just this week. You want a pathway to citizenship for the roughly 11 million undocumented immigrants. Would you sign any immigration bill if it did not include that, a pathway for the roughly 11 million undocumented?
Yeah, there's a whole range of things that relate to immigration, including the whole idea how you deal with, what confuses people is you talk about refugees, you talk about undocumented, you talk about people who are seeking asylum, and you talk about people who are coming from that are coming from camps or being held around the world. And there are 4 different criteria for being able to come to the United States.
They're coming from camps from around the world? What?
The vast majority of the people, those 11 million undocumented, they're not Hispanics. They're people who came on a visa, was able to buy a ticket to get in a plane and didn't go home. They didn't come across the Rio Grande and swim across, excuse me. and sorry, that's the Irish in me. But all kidding aside.
The Irish in him made him want to be a human being for a second and forget. Well, I mean, he's very forgetful that he's in a situation that he has to ask, like, it's so dangerous to be close to people. He forgot for a second he's really for a transhumanist agenda. I mean, think about what he's rambling on about via immigration. I mean, give me a break. He's not wrong that a lot of people do come over here and then they overstay their visas. Okay, that's absolutely 100% true. But, when we talk about decency as well, love Trump or hate Trump, when he was saying to Joe Biden, who put him in cages, Joe? Who put him in cages, Joe? He didn't have anything to say back, did he?
All right, so there are a lot of things that relate, but I think that we can no longer, look, you've heard, even if you're not involved in...
Are you listening? I mean, again, look, even if you're not in, he was asked about whether he would sign an immigration bill that didn't blanket give citizens amnesty. And he just keeps going.
Politics at all, you've probably heard me say this 1,000 times. And matter of that, everyone is entitled to be treated with decency, with dignity. Everyone is entitled to that. And
they're going to act like this guy is mentally stable enough to run anything? He can barely stick to the script given to him by other minions of the predator class on behalf of their agenda. This is hard.
We don't do that now for the first time in American history. If you're seeking asylum, meaning you're being persecuted, you're seeking asylum, you can't do it from the United States. You used to come, have an asylum officer determine whether or not you met the criteria and send you back. if you, in fact, but you can't even do that. You got to seek asylum from abroad.
But just to be clear, though, and I know you're going to be announcing stuff later this week, or that's what I've heard, you do want a pathway to citizenship for roughly 11 million undocumented immigrants, and that would be essential in any bill for you.
Well, yes. But by the way, if you came along and said to me, in the meantime, we can work out a system whereby we're going to, for example, we used to allow refugees, 125,000 refugees into the United States on a yearly basis. It was as high as 250,000. Trump cut it to 5,000. Come with me into Sierra Leone. Come with me into parts of Lebanon. Come with me around the world and see people piled up in camps, kids dying, no way out, refugees fleeing from persecution. We, the United States, used to do our part. We were part of that. Send me your huddled masses. Come on. And so I would, if you had a refugee bill by itself, I'm not suggesting that, but there's things that I would deal by itself, but not at the expense of saying I'm never going to do the other. There is a reasonable path to citizenship.
Now, I just want to make things clear. Why isn't he talking about all the destabilization of many of those regions, especially we talk about, Lebanon, of those regions of South American countries by Central Intelligence on behalf of organizations like the IMF and their corporate interests, so they can overtake their resources, literally water in some cases. Why are they so destabilized? These resource-rich countries. Why do we have those refugees, Joe? Why aren't you going at the core of the problem, Joe? Decency.
And it shows up, one of the reasons why we have been able to compete with the rest of the world so well is most of our major competitors are xenophobic. I remember you questioned me when I came back from China, and I said, I predict within less than a year they're going to end their one China policy.
Yeah, their one China policy. He can't even say one child policy. Who's home, Joe?
And I got clobbered by saying, because said Biden didn't talk about the fact that how immoral it was, and it was when we were running against the Republican ticket led by Mitt Romney, a fine guy.
You just talked to China's president.
Yes, for 2 hours.
What about the Uyghurs? What about human rights abuses?
We must speak up for human rights. It's who we are. We can't. My comment to him was, and I know him well, and he knows me well. We're a 2-hour conversation.
You talked about this to him.
I talked about this too.
Now this clip has got a lot of play. Now obviously the Muslims they have in camp, the Uyghurs, okay, not only are in camps but then doing slave labor. They're a big part of getting this whole pandemic moving. Well, they were locking people down, right, and emptying the factories and then putting them into those factories. All right, that's a big thing. Now, Joe can barely answer a question. Let's listen carefully to what he has to say here.
And that's not so much refugee, but I talked about it. I said, look, Chinese leaders, if you know anything about Chinese history, it has always been the time when China has been victimized by the outer world is when they haven't been unified at home. So vastly overstated, the central principle of Xi Jinping is that there must be a united, tightly controlled China. And he uses his rationale for the things he does based on that. I point out to him, no American president can be sustained as a president if he doesn't reflect the values of the United States. And so the idea, I'm not going to speak out against what he's doing in Hong Kong, what he's doing with the Uyghurs in western mountains of China, and Taiwan trying to end the one China policy.
The one China policy, again, he can't even say one child policy. But let's let him wrap it up. He's trying to go somewhere here. Is he going to condemn it? You're going to speak out against it?
By making it forceful. I said, and by the way, he said he gets it. Culturally, there are different norms that each country and their leaders are expected to follow.
So now he says he gets that I'll have to speak out against him, But now is he excusing it because there's different cultural norms in China? And remember, to me, China's just a globalist beta test for a track, trace, database, full-on social credit score, cashless society control grid to bring in not only that UBI automation nation, but a transhumanist movement and agenda.
But my point was that when I came back from meeting with him and traveling 17,000 miles with him when I was vice president, he was the vice president. That's how I got to know him so well, at the request of President Hu, not a joke, his predecessor, President Hu, and President Obama wanted us to get to know one another because he was going to be the president. And I came back and said they're going to end their one-child policy because they're so xenophobic.
So it took 4 times for him to get one-child policy. He said one China for the 3rd time. He finally got it. So if Joe were like not a zombie and not a puppet president, and let's say a third baseman for the St. Louis Cardinals, and he came up the 4th time, that means he'd be batting .250, huh? Hey, solid Joe, huh? And that one, it was like a dip single that kind of just eked through the infield. Maybe even like a chopper that went over the third baseman's head and was just too high up, and he dug it out. He really ran hard for that one. Finally got one-child policy in there.
They won't let anybody else in, and more people are retired than working. How can they sustain economic growth when more people are retired?
When you talk,
what does that mean? So wait, are you now? First of all, did you rationalize it before because of different cultural norms? But now you're saying because there are more people that are retired in China, in order to take care of them, you need slave labor?
To him, though, about human rights abuse, is that as far as it goes in terms of the U.S., or is there any actual repercussions for China?
Well, there will be repercussions for China, and he knows that. What I'm doing is making clear that we, in fact, are going to continue to reassert our role as spokespersons for human rights at the UN and other agencies that have an impact on their attitude. China is trying very hard to become the world leader. And to get that moniker and to be able to do that, they have to gain the confidence of other countries. And as long as they're engaged in activity that is contrary to basic human rights, it's going to be hard for them to do that. But it's much more complicated now. I shouldn't have tried to talk China policy in 10 minutes on television.
Oh, you shouldn't? Because you did a pretty piss-poor job in the 4 minutes you stumbled through it. You shouldn't try to talk China policy for 10 minutes on television. Are we too dumb to understand, Joe? Or can you just not, explain your way out of a wet paper bag because you haven't said that they're going to suffer any consequences, economic or otherwise, and that you're going to do anything to stop those cultural norms? And your eyes widened the most when you had talked about the elderly population, which really worries me, Joe. I mean, you're an elderly old man. It might not be much longer for you, Joe, but you're not going to stand up for all those other elderlies? What, because you're going to dance with the devil in the pale moonlight? Man, I wanted to get that original Tim Burton Batman reference off so good, and I didn't. But you're going to do it, Joe, so you want everybody else to meet their maker? What is going on?
Let me bring it back to the United States. I want you to meet Jocelyn Fish, a Democrat from Racine. Jocelyn is the director of marketing for a community theater. Jocelyn, welcome. Your question.
Hello. Good evening, Mr. President. Student loans are crushing my family, friends, and fellow Americans.
Me too.
You think
the
I'm
American
kidding?
dream is to succeed, but how can we fulfill that dream?
He's got jokes. You think I'm kidding? Come on. Come on, man.
When debt is many people's only option for a degree. We need student loan forgiveness beyond the potential $10,000 your administration has proposed. We need at least a $50,000 minimum. What will you do to make that happen?
I will not make that happen. It depends on whether or not you go to a private university or public university. It depends on the idea that I say to a community, I'm going to forgive the debt, the billions of dollars of debt for people who have gone to Harvard and Yale and Penn and schools my children. I went to a great school. I went to a state school. But is that going to be forgiven rather than use that money to provide for early education for young children who come from distant...
And care about young children, by the way. He's basically saying, if you thought that your ideas of student loan forgiveness and free college and any of that Johnny nonsense was happening, it ain't happening, Jackson. Don't you understand that was never really the plan ever, 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 ever?
Any circumstances. But here's what I think. I think everyone, and I've been proposing this for 4 years, everyone should be able to go to community college for free. For free. That costs $9 billion, and we should pay for it. And the tax policies we have now, we should be able to pay for it. You spend almost that money as a break for people who own racehorses. And I think any family...
Did he say that was a break for people who own racehorses?
And the tax policies we have now, we should be able to pay for it. You spend almost that money as a break for people who own racehorses. And I think...
So he's bringing up an obscure tax break for racehorse owners, which is a sport, and all sports teams and leagues have those kind of tax benefits. But he's talking about that in the sense, listen, community college, whatever. I think if you really wanted to do it, you offer everybody a 2-year trade school. Okay, a 2-year trade school, and even at a minimum payment. I mean, that's what you want to do.
Any family making under $125,000 whose kids go to a state university they get into, that should be free as well. And the thing I do in
that would
terms
cost
of
a lot
student
more.
debt that's accumulated is provide for changing the existing system now for debt forgiveness if you engage in volunteer activity. For example, if you were if you're teaching school, after 5 years you'd have $50,000 of your debt forgiven. If you worked in a battered women's shelter, if you worked and so on. So you'll be able...
You know, those programs have been proposed for a long time, and actually I am in favor of them. But a lot of people have to understand the majority of those when they talk, you know, they want to say something like a battered woman's shelter. But in reality, a lot of like small level drinking tickets, anything a lot lower than a misdemeanor in local communities, they end up working at a Salvation Army or something else that you know, helps those. So that's already kind of taken. I'm not saying that this is a bad idea, but it's not one Joe Biden's come up with or is going to put into action. None of this will come to fruition, I promise you.
To forgive debt. Thirdly, I'm going to change the position that we have now to allow for debt forgiveness, because it's so hard to calculate, whereby you can now, depending on how much you make and what program you saw, you can work off that debt by the activity you have, and you cannot be charged more than X% of your take-home pay so that it doesn't affect your ability to buy a car, own a home, etc. Each of my children graduated from school. I mortgaged the house. I was listed as the poorest man in Congress for, not a joke, for over 30 years. And but I was able to borrow. I bought a home I spent a lot of time working on, and I was able to sell it for some profit. But my oldest son graduated after undergraduate and graduate school with $136,000 in debt after working 30 hours a week during school. My other son went to Georgetown and Yale Law School, graduated $142,000 in debt, and he worked for the parking service down in Washington.
No mention of any kind of backdoor Ukrainian deals. I mean, this is like La La Land. This is, I mean, give me a break. And he's rambling and rambling and rambling like he's Joe Biden and his family get it. They get it. Come on.
My daughter went to Tulane University and then got a master's at Penn. She graduated $103,000 in debt. So I don't think anybody should have to pay for that, but I do think you should be able to work it off. My daughter's a social worker. My other son ran the World Food Program USA, and so on. They didn't qualify. But my point is, I understand the impact of the debt, and it can be debilitating. And I think there's a whole question about what universities are doing. They don't need more skyboxes. What they need is more money invested in making. That's why I provide, for example, $80 billion, $70 billion.
Did he even answer that? He said in making what?
Skyboxes. What they need is more money invested in making. That's why I provide, for example, $80 billion.
He just said in making what? In making what, Joe? They need to invest in making what? Not skyboxes. In making what? What is going on?
$70 billion over 10 years for HBCUs and other minority-serving universities, because they don't have the laboratories to be able to bring in those government contracts that can train people in cybersecurity or other future endeavors that pay well. But I do think that in this moment of economic pain and strain, that we should be eliminating interest on the debts that are accumulated, number one. And number two, I'm prepared to write off the $10,000 debt, but not 50.
Mr. President, let me ask you.
Because I don't think I have the authority to do it by sign of a pen.
What? So now all that, and he says, basically, wait, did you realize that? Look how he slipped that in. That's how gone this guy is. He says, because I'm prepared to sign a piece of paper saying I can do it for $10,000, but not for $50,000, because I don't think I have the authority to do that. What are you talking about? Do you have the authority for the $10,000, but not the $50,000? Whose authority do you need to get if you can get the 10 and not the 50 by signing a piece of paper? This is like Wild Town. Wild Town. And this is why I wanted to watch the whole thing with you guys, because I had to watch the whole thing for myself, just watching the 5 or 6 clips that were out there. And I didn't want to take anything out of context. And I wanted to see, how feebly minded this guy actually is. I realize this is a tough watch. Guys, we got another 6.5 minutes to go. So we're going to get through this together. I promise you, together, we're going to get through this.
You have, over the years, over your career, you've already spent a great deal of time at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, except now you're living there and you're president. It's been 4 weeks. What's it like?
Who cares?
How's it different?
It's not funny.
I get up in the morning and look at Jill and say, where the hell are we?
Woo! I wake up in the morning, I look at Jill and I say, where the hell are we? I'm sure he was doing that before he was in the White House. He doesn't know where he is. That's probably, other than the part where he brings up the experimentation on black people via like Tuskegee and stuff, where he doesn't mention that. That may be the most honest thing he said so far, is that when he wakes up in the morning, he looks at his wife, and he says, where the hell are we? Wow. Let's watch it again.
And it's been 4 weeks. What's it like? How's it different?
I get up in the morning and look at Jill and say, where the hell are we? No, it's, look, it's, I've only been president 4 weeks. And sometimes, because things are moving so fast, not because of burden, it feels like 4 years. It's not because of the burden. It's because there's so much happening that you're constantly focusing on one problem or opportunity, one right ad seriatim. But what happens is that it's What I didn't realize, I had been in the Oval Office 100 times as vice president, or more than that, every morning for the initial meetings, but I had never been up in the residence. And one of the things that, I don't know about you all, but I was raised in a way that you didn't look for anybody to wait on you. And it's where I find myself extremely self-conscious. They're wonderful people, work at the White House. But someone, standing there and, making sure hands me my suit coat, or
You'd never been in the residence of the White House?
I only been upstairs in the yellow room, the oval upstairs.
I don't know. I've never been there either. But
no, but it's look, the people down there are wonderful, and I find that like my dad. You've heard me say this before. My dad used to say, everybody's entitled to be treated with respect.
I mean, he said that again and again and again, and he's apologized for rambling, and he said things are important, and he's been thrown softballs. This is so gosh darned bizarre. The other thing is about the White House at this point. Let's be realistic. Let's not live in a fairy tale, okay? Those that surround the White House in most cases are military, our Secret Service, our intelligence agents. And at this point, you would think that those closest have some connection in some way or are being surveilled 110% on behalf of those agencies. That's what would make me the most uncomfortable. And Joe's rambling.
And it's interesting how decent and incredible these folks are.
Is it different than you expected it to be in some way?
I don't know what I ever expected it to be. It is different in that, get in trouble here. I said when I was running, I wanted to be president not to live in the White House, but to be able to make the decisions about the future of the country. And so living in the White House, as you've heard other presidents who have been extremely flattered to live there, it's a little like a gilded cage in terms of being able to walk outside and do things. The vice president's residence was totally different. You're on 80 acres, overlooking the rest of the city, and you can walk out. There's a swimming pool. You can walk off a porch in the summer and jump in a pool and go into work. You can ride a bicycle around and never leave the property and work out. But the White House is very different, and I feel a sense of, I must tell you, a sense of history about it. John Meacham, who you know, and several other presidential historians helped me with I asked my brother, who's good at this, to set up the Oval Office for me, because it all happens within 2 hours, literally. They move everything out, move something, and it was interesting to hear these historians talk about what other presidents have gone through and the moments, and who were the people who stepped up to the ball and who's the people who didn't. And what you realize is the most consequential thing for me is, although I've known this watching 7 presidents who I got to know fairly well, is I always in the past looked at the presidency in the terms of Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt and George Washington, and how could they're superhuman. But I had to remind myself that they're really fine men that I knew well the last 7 presidents. And at least they're people who I knew well enough to know that I could play on the same team with.
Like, what is going on here? Have you ever heard something ramble on for so long and not mean anything? To think that he's on, a tier at this point. Hey, Gangster Joey B from a decade ago, definitely could play ball. This guy, my God.
So it took away the sense of, this is my God. I'm not Abraham Lincoln. I'm not Franklin Roosevelt. How do I deal with these problems?
Have you picked up the phone and called any former president yet?
Yes, I have.
Do you want to say who?
No, I don't. They're private conversations. But, by the way, all of them have, with one exception, picked up the phone and called me as well.
I know you don't want to talk about him, but...
No, but look, this
is like a cringe fest.
Honor I think an American can be given from my perspective. And I literally pray that I have the capacity to do for the country what you all deserve need be done.
And I literally pray that something happens where we can restore our constitutional republic from a predator class that obviously bragged about fortifying this guy into office, fortifying them via Time magazine, who can barely speak, who wasn't somebody who was the most popular during the Democratic primaries. In another Bernie robbery. Love him or hate him, they robbed him again. The old fist to burn is what they gave him. And this was tough. Let's be honest. It was a tough watch along, guys. Do I even want to... There's like 45 seconds. Let's let them close it out.
But one thing I learned after 8 years with Barack is no matter how consequential the decision, I got to be the last person in the room with him literally on every decision. I could make a recommendation, but I walked out of the room and it was all him, man. Nobody else. The buck stops there. And that's where you pray for making sure that you're looking at the impact on the country and a little bit of good luck at the judgment you're making.
Mr. President, thank you so much for joining us.
There it is. I can't do it anymore. The Zombie Joe Show wraps up, guys. Thumbs the video up, subscribe, and share. Remember, we are fully demonetized here. We got our first strike. We were banned. We got thrown off of GoFundMe. There's some kind of Wall Street Journal shabizzle nizzle piece going in. We hope it's good. We can't say that we know it will be. Could be a hit piece on platforms like Rockfin, which I'm encouraging you to go over to. Rockfin. Look, if you can't give to the Go Get funding, I get it. If you can't be a premium member over at Rockfin, although it's a great deal at $9.99 a month, it supports me, it supports all the other creators, you get everybody's content. I also get it. Get the free content. Come on over. You're missing out on literally over 24 videos that are free and exclusive over there right now. Now's the time to make the jump, ROKFIN.com. Some people get angry at me and they're like, well, I'm not paying for Rockfin. I'm not asking you to pay for Rockfin. I'm asking you to come on over, okay, and make the account. So when I do get kicked off and fully deplatformed, you can go there and see my content. And guess what? I get to say some things over there I don't get to say here on YouTube. So again, thumbs it up, subscribe, share. Love you guys. It's not about left or right. It's about right and wrong. It always will be. And I want to thank all of you guys for joining me on that very tough watch of the Zombie Joe Show. Parts 1 and 2, only at Rockfin.